All right, welcome to Surviving HomeOwnership. I'm interviewing Realtor Jay Price with the Mike Thomas Realtors. Hi, Jay.
Hey, how's it going?
Going
It's been,
well. Thank you for coming. Do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself, and then got some questions for you?
um, I'm Jay Price. I'm a realtor, been for a little over 5 years now. I'm on a team with my father, Matt Price. And so the Price team, we just try to serve our clients best we can and just try to keep that integrity really high. Treat them like we would a close friend or family member. Um, and we work by referral. So that's important to us. We want clients for life, not just a one and done paycheck. So that keeps us a little more honest too.
Yeah, and I do notice a huge difference in realtors who have that mindset versus the ones like you were saying that they just want to do whatever it takes to get the deal through. So, a common question I'm hearing with buyers, or maybe it's a complaint, is they're saying, these realtors are making a killing and they're not doing anything. Like, how hard is it to show someone a house once, write an offer, and then it sells the next day? Or if you're selling a house, you can just list it, it's guaranteed to sell. Like, this is a lot of money for very little work. How do you respond to that? Are there any hidden values of a realtor that the average person doesn't think about?
Now, one of my favorite settings to hate or sayings to hate is realtors get paid way too much to do way too little. Um, so, I mean, and my response is always, yeah, come shadow us for a day. Come hang out my office for one day and see how I work, see how the other people in my office work day to day. And yeah, I mean, it's like anything. You hear about the wonderful, amazing stories, the one and done deals, and oh man, that was so easy. But for every one of those, you've got several that are, let's just say, uh, huge pain. And, sometimes you think, you calculate your dollars per hour and you think, why am I doing this? But bottom line is if you're not a people person, if you don't genuinely care about people and, uh, you know, believe that, or believe in home ownership, it's really not going to be lucrative enough for you to stay in it for the long haul. Because there's just a lot to it. There's a lot to it. And we don't always brag about all the work we do because most of us aren't that way. We just put our clients' needs first and make sure it gets to the closing table. And, they don't need to know about all the stress that goes on between getting a property under a contract to getting it to the closing table all the time because they're trying to move and they've got their own stuff they're trying to deal with, working and moving and packing and whatever else is going on in their life to precipitate the move.
Can you maybe give us a list of steps or just let us know what's involved behind the scenes that people aren't thinking about at all?
Like during the transaction or before or after?
All of that. Yeah. I mean, maybe not necessarily walk us through like a complete step-by-step list, but what are some of the things people don't even think about when just say they're thinking about doing a for sale by owner? Because, in their minds, they can list the property and it's going to be sold in the next week and they're going to save a bunch of money. What's the stress and the headaches that they're not thinking about until they're in the midst of trying to figure out how to actually close this thing?
Yeah. Well, first I'd say statistically speaking, you actually will net more money at the end of the sale by using a realtor, even paying full commission. So there's just a lot of uh, things like, you talk about, first of all, writing the contract in the proper way, making sure that the buyer and the seller or one or the other isn't trying to take advantage, even accidentally, of the other person. And then just making sure that the property contingencies are in place for when, if the sale has any bumps, that there's a set way of how to deal with those bumps And you always hear horror stories maybe about inspections or appraisals, which is part of the process. But in the end, it's about making sure that that buyer makes an informed decision. And when they close on that property, the seller has no more responsibility of that property. And everybody is happy, and we don't have legal recourse going back after the sale. So that's a big part of that, and that's why a lot of those contingencies are in there that people are scared of. But when you have somebody, an agent in your corner, and even if there's two agents, one representing buyer, one representing the seller, if they both are doing what they're supposed to do, it really just goes smoother, and usually everybody is more taken care of and happier in the end, despite the stresses during. And I'd also say too is, when you're thinking about selling, where you list it at your list price is very important because, I've been saying lately with the current market conditions in the extreme sellers market, I think a monkey could throw a sign in a yard and probably the deal, probably could get the deal under contract and maybe even close, but, did you price it right? Are you leaving money on the table? Are you getting the best buyer? Just having somebody to navigate that process that's done it, hundreds of times versus most individuals have bought or sold a house maybe 3 times, 4 times in their lifetime, some more, some less. There's just no way you're going to be as adept in dealing with those issues in the transaction itself without that day in and day out experience.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Do you have a pen or anything on the table? Every now and then I hear something kind of clinking.
It's probably me messing with stuff.
Oh, okay. Okay.
I fidget and I fiddle.
Okay. Well, I can edit this part out, but all right. So on to the next question. Where do you see people who are preparing their home for sale? Where do you see them wasting a lot of money, a lot of time? What are some renovations they do that are just a waste of money, but they think are really going to add a lot of value to the property when they go to sell?
This client for life thing is super important to me. I just think, whether a really good agent, you have a really good relationship with an agent that you trust or not, I would suggest getting one if you are just thinking on the horizon, we would like to move. Because, a good agent's not going to twist your arm into doing so sooner than you want to. And that's my point in that, to segue into the answer to the question, is have a realtor let you know what improvements are going to gain you when you're doing them. If you're going to stay in a house for 5 years or more, you don't necessarily need to see an exact return on things that you spend in the house because you're going to get some enjoyment out of it. But if you're just improving things to sell the home, that's especially, why over improve something when you're not going to see the return in it? There's certain things that you can do to a house that is going to be a higher bang for your buck, if you will. If you redo your kitchen, for instance, that's a big example I use. You might spend $20,000 on a new kitchen when the average that you're going to get more in your sale is maybe $2,000. And so if you spend 20 on your new kitchen and then you call me and say, hey, I just put $20,000 into the kitchen, I'm going to say, that's great. Kitchen and bathrooms really sell a house, but that $20,000 is not going to be seen. Most of that's not going to be paid back to you. And that's, typical situation, but I do stress that, it's very important to consider your individual neighborhood, individual home, depends on price point and how dated it might be. there's just a lot of things. So, me knowing a house even years in advance from selling it, being able to advise, just, hey, the implications of what you're spending. Certain things that are broken need fixed. A new roof, hey, you don't want your roof to leak. That's going to cause many, many other issues. But, so that's something that just needs done. Something like, let's, put in fancy finishings on a house, or let's add on 300 square feet. That's not always a great idea for certain neighborhoods or, the price point that you're in. So I just stress that not only get an agent involved to advise you on how much you're adding to your value of your home or not, but also, a lot of agents will be able to tell you, especially the ones that work by referral, will be able to tell you good contractors to use that will be people that you can count on, trust their work, and that will actually show up and do what they said they're going to do, oftentimes for a reasonable price as well.
That makes a lot of sense. What are some things that you always tell people to go ahead and fix or replace? What are some of those big ticket items that you want done before a house sells if there's some issues?
Well, always is a tough word to use. It depends on each individual's money situation as well. Some people, I go to their homes, they need to sell, they're in dire straits, and there is no money to do an improvement. There's not enough equity in the house to, make it worth their while. You come into all kinds of situations, but ideally, things like fresh paint usually goes a long way. One thing I will say always on is, it sounds simple, but it is, a cleaning person, or just, get the elbow grease out and do it yourself. But a real detailed clean, shampooing the carpet, washing the windows in detail, wiping down the walls a lot of times, fans being dusted, fixtures, etc. Just a real high detail clean on everything is by far the biggest bang for your buck. It really gives people a sense of, oh wow, these people really take pride in their home. So that I would say always, easily, because no matter what your price point is, a clean home is always going to show better than, oh, what, they have got dust on all their fans, they must not take care of their house at all. Which, that's, right or wrong, that's what people start thinking. So that would be my thought. But really, like I said, it really depends on the individual home, the individual neighborhood, the different price points.
Okay, so the next question would be, what are some of the items that you try to negotiate over after an inspection? What are some things that you just don't want to try to negotiate for? How do buyers, obviously going through a real estate agent, they can get some guidance, but what are some things that buyers can typically ask the sellers to do, even in today's hot market?
Well, according to the purchase agreement, the inspection language in there is that you can ask for safety-related items, health and safety-related items. You can also ask for what they call major issues, which is pretty gray if you think about it. And then significant value decreasing factors, which is also fairly gray. So the easiest thing to negotiate is that health and safety, because there are certain things that come up that, hey, that's unsafe, or that's unhealthy, and so things like that are pretty easy to ask for. Active plumbing leaks, that's pretty hard to, oh, that'll be fine. That's obviously going to get worse, not better. An active roof leak, foundation issues, where, hey, there's something wrong with the structural integrity of the structure. Those things are pretty big things that almost everybody wants to get addressed. A broken window would be another thing I would say.
So electrically, what are you looking for negotiating with that?
It depends on what's found. Um, you know, a lot of times a rebuttal for please fix an electrical item is, hey, it's been like that for 50 years or whatever, however long it's been, and it hasn't caught on fire. Um, but if something you're not aware of, it's potentially dangerous. Different people living in the house are going to use it in a different way. Things could come to light that are issues just based on different use patterns. For instance, if you're drawing a lot of electricity out of a certain outlet, but the new owners don't use that outlet at all, they're using a different one that it does have a potential issue. And if they're drawing a lot out of a certain outlet, that may cause some issues there. So they kind of just, what I generally will do is I'll have an electrician look at several or all of the electrical items found on an inspection, and I defer to the expert opinion of a licensed electrician at that point, because if they deem it as safe or proper, then that kind of rests on their license, if that makes sense. So I'm not really in the business of saying what's safe and what's not, because for each individual, they have different tolerances for that. So I try to just let the electrician inform and advise as they need to, and then we try to negotiate from there.
Knob and tube wiring, what commonly happens with that? I see it a lot, and I don't offer negotiating advice, but people are concerned about that when they find it. So is that something you try to have replaced? What happens when you find knob and tube?
Well, obviously it's not ideal, but again, the argument of, if you have a knob and tube home, it's probably getting on 100 years old or more. So it hasn't burned down yet is, but that's still not the best way to do things. So it really depends on the situation of the seller, the comfort level of the buyer, like I said, the use factor. If you're going to be drawing a lot of amps off of, a certain wire, it's going to heat up more than another one would. So again, I really probably just defer to what an electrician will advise, and then temper that with the thoughts of that particular buyer. And then we try to see what the seller would be willing to do.
Are you able to negotiate a radon mitigation system if the levels test high?
I would say easily 90% or more of the time that we ask for a radon system, it's done by the seller at the cost of the seller. It's one of those things where many people are just not informed about it, and when they find out about it, or if they find out that the level has been high in their home that they've lived in for 30 years or however long it's been, they're thinking, oh no, am I okay? And with the research studies that have been done, there's enough of that most people understand that, hey, for this buyer to feel comfortable living in this home, we're going to need to do that. And in the grand scheme of things, it's usually not too bad of a price to get it done. And they're not too clunky of systems. They last a pretty good amount of time. They're pretty simple to operate and maintain. So it goes a long way for a buyer to get that done for them.
So for a first-time home buyer who's never used a realtor before and they don't have any realtor friends, what would be your advice on the things they should look for when they're selecting a realtor?
my opinion, I think that you need to trust the realtor. I think that's first and foremost. Trust that they have your best interest in mind. Um, Trust that um, they care enough to do their job the right way for you. Um, and because it's something that buying a home, and there could be an argument made for this, I guess, but it's more of an investment for most people. You could buy a car, brand new car, and you're going to lose a lot of your value over the time that you drive it. Whereas if you buy a home, you can generally sell it for hopefully more, or at least the same amount that you bought it for in years to come. And so if you maintain it properly, that can be a good way to, if you're paying off a mortgage, you're increasing your net worth with your principal payments. And when you go to sell that home, you get that equity um, out of it to either put down on the next house or do with it what you will. So statistically speaking, the net worth of a homeowner is vastly higher than those who don't own a home. Um, so
Are
I
there
think
any are there any red flags that you would tell people if you hear your realtor do this or say this, to maybe be leery of them if they don't know them well? I know a lot of people are just finding the realtors on Zillow or some of those online sources, and they just don't know the person's integrity or competence. So what are some of those warning signs that maybe as you're interacting with realtors that there's just a little uncomfortable feeling that comes up thinking this may not be a great realtor for the buyer or the seller?
that's a tough question because as realtors, we're independent contractors. Even technically speaking, Dad and I are on a team, but somebody could say, I really don't like him. I want you to get, I want you only. And the guy across the hall from me or in the office next door to me is a good friend of mine, but he's also my competition. Maybe not directly all the time, but technically. And so what that allows is a lot of freedom to run your business the way that you want to run it. So there are agents that, they are uh, high pressure sales a little bit more than others, and they're very successful agents. Um, I think that we are bound by a code of ethics as realtors, and so I like to think that most of us are out there working with integrity, but I can't say that everyone is the same. Obviously, every profession has their bad apples, if you will. Um, I just think that it comes down to that trust. You know, do you feel that this person is needing the paycheck really bad and will say anything to get you to buy something, um, or are they allowing you to make the decision, advising more? For myself, I'm better at talking people out of homes than into them as a buyer, because I see red flags as far as resale goes. Right now, in the extreme sellers market that we're experiencing, you're seeing homes that have, for instance, something that might back up to an interstate or a railroad track, or on a busy road, or busy interchange, something like that, uh, is selling very quickly, or even things with questionable foundations, things like that are selling very quickly and for premium. And another thing I would say is maybe floodplain, because floodplain is something that if you have a mortgage, you're going to be required to pay flood insurance. A lot of times it's very expensive, and it's hard to sell a home in any of those things that I mentioned in a buyer's market where it's turned around from what it is. If people have 10 homes to pick from, there's one by a railroad track and they don't really prefer to have the train noise, they're going to pick the one that's not right next to the railroad track, and you're going to have to give the house away, so to speak, or you're just going to have to wait a long time for that right buyer who just loves trains. So those are things that, I'll help anyone buy anything that they want, but I'm going to tell them up front, hey, there may be an issue with this home when you go to sell it if the market is not how it currently is, and you should just bear that in mind.
You were talking the other day about some law of the harvest as far as when you sell a house. Can you explain what that is? I had never heard of it, and it's just one of those intriguing real estate facts that I'm sure most people don't know about.
Well, I probably need to check into that to make sure I don't have it flip-flopped. But I know that, for instance, like when a farmer would sell their field, but if they already have crops planted in the ground, um, he does have the right to, after that sale, go and harvest those fruits or whatever that may be. Um, so it's just something that, oh, well, it's mine now. Well, that farmer planted those crops. That goes to him, and that's kind of an Indiana law. There's different things. Actually, if you're going to sell a home, and let's say you have a rose bush planted in your yard that your grandma gave you, or whoever it was, it's been passed down. Technically, that is considered real property. And so if you want to keep that rose bush, you better exclude that from your listing or have it dug out of the ground so the potential buyers don't come and fall in love with your house because of your beautiful rose bush. You you better have that out of there, because they're not going to pay $10,000 because you think that rose bush is worth $10,000 because grandma gave it to you.
Well, you were saying that technically speaking, you could even come back and get your tomatoes after they ripened in the fall, right?
That's what I want to check on to make sure that applies in a non-commercial situation. But so.
Okay. Well, do you have any other just random kind of interesting real estate facts that you think people should know about?
Hmm. Probably not off the cuff. They just spring to my brain randomly. I'll try to fit one in on one of the other answers.
Okay. Well, I think, except if you could kind of go through maybe the only other question I have is if you could go through a step by step of what are all the things that you have to do when you're buying a house as far as like inspections, appraisals, all of that kind of stuff. And what is the order that those usually take place in? I'm curious to know about some of that.
Yeah, so ideally, and this is how I like to work, is before you buy, you need to meet with a lender. You need to figure out what you can spend, and then what you want to spend, because often that's different based on payments and whatnot. And find out, okay, I'm officially pre-approved for X amount of dollars. And then at that point, I like to meet with the buyer. They have their price point established. They know how high they'd feel comfortable going. And that's when I meet and I will go over the criteria that they would like to have for a home, their wants and needs based on that budget. And at that point, I set them up on a search. That's the part where you look. That's the fun part everybody wants to do. But doing those first two steps, I think, is really important to kind of explain the market, the current market situation, whether it's the same as it is now or different. What's involved in the process. Actually explaining this process to someone is part of my buyer's presentation, because I believe that it's important to know what you're getting into before you're looking at a home and you're faced with the question, do you want to buy this home? You kind of need to know what that means, what all is going to be involved. On a typical purchase agreement, and I say typical because there's obviously different things that you can write in, and different terms you can offer. But in a typical purchase agreement, if the buyer is needing a mortgage, there's going to be several things. Title work is really important. I always say in hurdles, okay? There's 3 hurdles, if you will. Title work is one of those. It makes sure that the property in question is, in fact, the seller's, and that they have the right to sell it to you. And it also ensures that when you purchase that home, once it's yours, it's free and clear of any liens or judgments that that seller may have incurred, or even the previous owner, or it goes back all the way to when it was originally platted. And that way you don't have somebody coming in and say, hey, this is my house, or have any nasty surprises about, oh, you owe all this money because this debt is attached to this property that you now own. So that's one hurdle that I say needs to be satisfied before you can make that purchase. Usually there's not too many issues with that, but that's why you look at it. You just want to make sure, because the last thing you want is to spend thousands more than you thought and have no ability to get out of the contract when it comes up, if the seller's not willing to take care of that. The other things that are maybe more common, inspection is another part of it, where basically, you've already agreed on a sale price, and you believe that that is a fair price for the home, and so does the seller. But then you get an inspector like Andy or somebody in there that finds some flaws that you didn't know about, that the seller didn't even know about. And now, instead of saying, oh man, that house is worth this much, you say, well, now that I know about these issues, I know the house to be worth less. And that's a good thing, because the seller is generally going to be unaware of these items, and it's going to be a surprise to them. And a lot of times I have sellers that feel bad. Oh man, I didn't know that was wrong. If I would have known it was wrong, it would have been fixed already. So at that point, it's a renegotiation of sorts, where the buyer is saying, hey, I need these issues either corrected, or I need an adjustment on the price or something like that to satisfy the things that need done to the property to make it what I thought it was. And the third one I'd say is the appraisal. That's when the bank appraiser, and the appraiser does represent the bank, to ensure that the property is worth what it's selling for, contracted sale price. So if that appraiser comes in, for instance, we'll use $100,000 as an example. If that appraiser comes in and says that the property is worth $110,000, then the buyer will be very happy about that, because that means they've gotten a deal essentially. If the appraiser comes in and says that it's worth $100,000, that's also fine. That means that they're paying a fair price for it. And the seller doesn't always find out what the appraisal came in as, but the seller is generally pretty happy with an appraisal coming right in at value, because they essentially sold it for exactly what it's worth, the maximum. So the problem potentially is when an appraiser will come in and say the house is only worth $90,000 instead of the sale price of $100,000. At that point, what would happen is the bank is only going to lend based on the $90,000 instead of the $100,000. So the buyer will be, to continue with the transaction as written, the buyer would have to come up with their down payment percentage of $90,000, and additionally they would have to bring $10,000 essentially in cash to make up the difference between 90 and 100. Many times that's not a possibility for a seller, and it's usually not ideal either, because officially you are paying more for the house than it is worth. So that's a hard thing for a lot of people to stomach. And right now we are seeing quite a few transactions where it's written into the contract that the buyer agrees to pay a certain amount of dollars over appraisal cut if that is a situation that comes up. That is something that each buyer, in their own comfort level, can decide to do or not. But they need to know that when they're doing this and they're offering those terms, they are officially agreeing to pay over what that home is worth if that appraisal is cut. So officially in the contract, in a normal situation, the buyer and the seller would perhaps negotiate that. Many times the buyer is unwilling or unable to come up with extra funds to close that sale. So a lot of times the seller will come down to that appraised value if it's not disputed. Other times maybe there will be some sort of meet in the middle type of negotiation. So it just it does give the right to walk away to the buyer if that appraisal is cut, because you can't really force somebody to overpay for something. That's the reason for that. And so once you get through those conditions, and of course once your loan is finalized in that process, then you can go to the closing. That's generally you'll get like a final walkthrough to make sure that the repair items were completed to your satisfaction, make sure that the seller didn't gouge up all the walls when they were moving out. And then at that point you go to closing and get the keys, and that's all said and done at that point. So that's a typical buyer process. Now, I will go on a little segue here and say that, and I'll even tie this into why use a realtor, because oftentimes, it's one thing if you're moving from an apartment or from home, from your parents' home or anything like that, to buying a home. But when you're selling a home, how do you work out that timing? And as a realtor that does this full time, all I do is help people buy and sell homes. I'm very well versed in all the options. Does it work for you to be homeless for 3 months while you try to find a house? Does it work for you to pay 2 mortgage payments for several months until you find a new home, or until you can sell your home? There's a lot of different things to consider because for especially many people, being homeless isn't an option. There maybe isn't a good in-law to move in with or friend to move in with. That situation can get real hairy real fast. So it's very important to consider the timing and consider the actual net proceeds that you might get from a sale, to figure out how much you're going to carry forward on the buying side. So there's just a lot of things that, just to sell a house is very short-sighted, especially if you don't know where you're going to go. You don't have a good plan for that.
All right, I have 2 more questions for you. They came as you were speaking. So when someone's buying a house as is, and they have an inspection, does that mean they're just stuck, no matter what the inspector finds?
There is an addendum that is called the as-is addendum, which does not mean that you are stuck with whatever you find. In the as-is addendum, it gives you the right to have an inspection and gives you the right to walk away from the sale or renegotiate the sale based on your findings. What it does not allow you to do is to ask the seller to complete specific items. For instance, if you found, let's say, radon is high, you can't go to the seller and say, install an active mitigation system prior to closing. Now, if it's needed, you could renegotiate to say, we're going to need X amount of dollars off the purchase price to let us do those items on our own. But the seller, the important thing there is that the seller is not required to get have the contractors come out and do that work prior to closing. The waiving the inspection is a completely different animal. The waiving inspection, you are waiving your rights to an inspection. If the seller allows you to do an inspection, that would be their call based on it's their property, and if they would allow you to have an inspector do that. But no matter what you find, you're stuck with it. If you've waived your right to inspection, you have no recourse, you have no anything. So that is it's an option, and I am seeing it more and more that in the competitive market that we're in, just like that, appraisal, agreeing to pay over appraised value. I'm seeing a lot of people waiving inspections. But in my opinion, just knowing what I know about the process and what you can find, I truly believe that only about 2% of people have any business buying a home with no inspection. Because there are just so many things that you can find, and just because you watch Joanna Gaines or Flip or Flop doesn't mean you're equipped to handle rehab on a home. There is a lot involved. There's a lot of costs, and those people on the show, some of them are very successful at it, but they have gone to the school of hard knocks, many of them, and they know what it is to lose money as well, because it's not always a profitable venture. So just something to really think heavily on before you try to buy a house with no inspection.
Okay, so that's interesting. So there is a difference then between waiving inspection and buying a house as is.
Yes. And sometimes people will sell a house as is, intending for there not to be an inspection, intending to not give anything if the buyers find anything. But that form is, in my opinion, not very well named, just because it is as is in a way, but it's not what a seller might think if they just look at the form and see it signed. Oh, as is, great. That means I don't have to do anything. Well, not necessarily. There is recourse if they find things.
And the as is, if you're a seller, does not mean that if you know that there's major defects, you can hide it or just not disclose it, correct? You still need to disclose any significant items.
Lying is not good. If you lie about something, and it can be proved that you did lie about something, or when I say when you're done with the sale, it's done, that is an exception. If they find out that you lied about a material defect that you knew about, don't be surprised if you get sued. If there is a problem, don't try to hide it. Maybe you'll get away with it. Maybe you'll get lucky. But, it's best to just be out in the open with it. And I'll say, too, I guess some recent experience that I've had with people being nervous about major defects. I had a guy call me recently when he bought the house that he has. He had a water issue in his basement, and when he was trying to get the water out, he adjusted a window to open it, and the concrete in his wall cracked. And so he was convinced that he needed to sell his house for bottom dollar, and to just have somebody buy it in cash and just lowball it. And I said, well, let me come take a look. And when I did the research and I put him in contact with a structural engineer, it was revealed that it's not actually a structural issue, and that the problem was only with that little, the way that the window was basically getting cinched where it was, and it was improperly done. So in the end, instead of the $10,000 repair that was suggested by a contractor, the new fix based on the structural engineer, which is qualified to say is it okay or not, is going to require a mason and maybe a couple $1,000s of work. So, and he was prepared to give how many, 10, maybe 10,000, maybe more off of what his house could have sold for an issue that he was just ill-informed about. And when he got the proper research done for it, which only cost him $400 or less, that was worth every penny for him, obviously, because now he'll be able to sell that home for a very good amount of money because it doesn't have a foundation issue. So that's something that, if there's a major defect, do some research. It'll be probably worth your while because a fixed defect is no longer a defect. If it's done right, it is fixed. And there are many things that people just are scared of that can be fixed. There are contractors for about everything, and they can do amazing things to your house and make it good as new, at least in parts.
Okay, well, I think that really just demonstrates the value of a realtor right there. Had he just sold by owner, he would have lost out, it sounds like, on $8,000. That's significant.
Probably more, yeah.
Wow. Do you have any other things that you'd like to tell the audience? I don't have any other official questions.
Not that I can think of.
Well, hey, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. And you had a lot of good content.
Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it, and I enjoyed it.